Hey guys, the Kamsh here. Today we're going to be talking about the two new Blackrock spoilers, as well as going over some of the ones we talked about last week, because people have asked some questions and I want to take the time to answer those. Let me just start out by saying I saw all your guys' feedback about the sound and the video and the general layout and some other things like that, so I've tried to make any changes that I could. Want to create the best possible experience for the viewers. If you have any feedback, feel free to comment on the YouTube video or on tempostorm.com or to shoot me an email, and I can try to make any improvements you guys want to see or do any type of content you guys would like to see from me. So let's start off with people have asked a lot of questions about Hungry Dragon. Talked a little bit about this card last week, but just want to address some of the issues people have brought up. So a lot of people have said this card's good because it works well with AoE, things like Blizzard when you play it in the same turn. Um, I'm not going to disagree because everything's good with AoE, but when you're playing this with things like Blizzard, Blizzard isn't necessarily even guaranteed to kill the random one-cost minion. It's probably not guaranteed to kill the rest of your opponent's board either. And that's a 10 mana play that requires those two cards, and you're getting a 5/6 out of it and potentially clearing some of your opponent's board. The really expensive AoE spells you can't cast in the same turn as this, things like Flame Strike, etc. You can consecrate equality with this, but that takes, or equality consecrate, but that does take 3 cards and 10 mana, so at that point you might as well be playing Deathwing. Additionally, if you are going to go for the Paladin Hungry Dragon deck, make sure to equality first, then Hungry Dragon, then consecrate, so you don't end up with a 5/1. A lot of people have also said that this card has good synergy with MC Tech or Acolyte. As far as Acolyte goes, people are saying that the random one-cost minion can be used. You can run it into your Acolyte for card draw, but that takes 7 mana for you to make that play. So when you do that, your opponent's often going to have time or resources to deal with your Acolyte before you have a chance to attack the one-cost minion with it. In worst case scenario, if they really don't want you drawing cards, they can just run the 1 mana minion into the Hungry Dragon. So Acolyte with this isn't always going to draw you cards. Sometimes it'll draw you one, sometimes if they silence the Acolyte, it won't draw you any. So it's not really a foolproof plan, it's kind of reliant on your opponent having nothing. And you never really want to rely on that. You want to play as if your opponent has answers to your cards. So I don't think this is particularly great with Acolyte of Pain. As far as MC Tech goes, people are saying, if my opponent has 3 minions, we can give him another one, then steal something. First of all, your opponent would have to have 3 minions. You'd have to have Hungry Dragon and MC Tech in your hand, so that's 7 mana with 2 specific cards. Additionally, your MC Tech could steal the 1-drop minion, which obviously isn't great for you. And Leroy's been around for a long time, and playing Leroy than playing MC Tech to steal one of your opponent's minions, hopefully not a whelp, has never seen huge tournament success, so I don't think this will either. A lot of people have also asked me if there's any current cards we can compare this to, and I think actually one of the closer comparisons is Unstable Portal, because in both cases you're giving up tempo on for an undercosted beater. So with Unstable Portal, you spend 2 mana either on your second turn or sometime else in addition to another play, and if you get something that costs 3 mana or less, you can play right away. If you don't, then you have a large creature, but you have to cast it on the next turn. So you're likely playing a creature, either this or the next turn, that doesn't immediately affect the board. So you're losing tempo in that way, but you're also gaining something for 3 less mana than it would cost. So overall, 1 mana net cost gain. Whereas with Hungry Dragon, you're also getting a 5/6 for 4, which is usually a larger body than you would get. But you do summon a random 1-cost minion for your opponent, and that minion gets to attack before your Hungry Dragon does. So you're giving up some tempo in exchange for an undercosted beater in both cards. However, if you whiff on Unstable Portal or it's just a really bad time for you to lose out on tempo, you're only losing out on 2 mana worth of tempo or board control that you could be having, versus with Hungry Dragon, if they remove it and keep the 1 mana minion or something like that, you're losing out on your 4 mana turn, which is significantly worse for you. So they're both RNG reliant undercosted beaters that lose you tempo, but Unstable Portal is less of a risk. So overall, this card has a good body, but I think the risk on the random cost minion and the loss of tempo is too great for it to be exceptional and constructed, although I think it could see play. So moving on, someone actually asked me to explain why Blackwing Technician is not a strictly better spider tank. So Spider Tank requires, or Spider Tank gives you synergy, whereas Blackwing Technician requires synergy. So Spider Tank is always going to be a 3/4, and it's a mech. So in your mech decks, it's always going to enable mech synergies, like Power Mace if you're playing Shaman, or Blast Mage if you're playing Mage, things like that. So Spider Tank is always going to grant you resources. This is always going to require that you have a dragon. So even if this becomes a 3/5 and has 1 point of stats more than Spider Tank, it still requires you to have a dragon, and afterwards it doesn't provide you any dragon synergy, whereas Spider Tank will provide you mech synergy as long as it stays on the board. I think a closer mech card comparison to this would be Tinkertown Technician, where they both require you to have something, and they both cost 3 mana, but since Tinkertown is a 4/4 and it'll also give you a spare part, I think on average it's going to be better than this, and Tinkertown is still only played in the heavy mech-themed decks, so Blackwing Technician I think is only going to see play in decks with a lot of dragons, if that becomes an archetype, which is why I didn't rate it super highly. So moving on, a lot of people have asked me about Rend Blackhand. People have said that because this kills Ysera, and Ysera will be popular in decks where you want to be holding dragons, this card's going to be great. So let's talk about that a little. If Ysera becomes really popular in the metagame, which is a distinct possibility, I think every class has a good way to deal with it. So going over this, we have Hex from Shaman, can turn Ysera into a frog. We have Sap from Rogue, which is a huge tempo gain because Ysera costs 9, and Rogue will just be able to kill you in that length of time if you're just playing Ysera over and over again. Equality from Paladin is going to wipe it out. Polymorph from Mage will turn it into a sheep. Execute, Shield Slam, Brawl, etc. from Warrior will kill it. Mind Control or Cabal plus Shrinkmeister will steal it in Priest. Hunter's Mark or Freezing Trap deal with it quite well in Hunter. Siphon Soul will just kill Ysera in Warlock. And Druid wins against Ysera sort of by default because it just ramps faster. And if they're playing Ysera, which doesn't immediately affect the board, or taunt or heal, Combo Druid or Fast Druid is just going to kill them. So every class has a good ways to deal with Ysera if Ysera comes into the metagame, and those classes have a good way to deal with Ysera without altering their decks too much. Whereas this is really interesting because it's a tech card that forces you to alter your deck significantly to use it, because it needs you to have lots of dragons. So you have to build your deck around a tech card, which I'm not super excited to do. In addition, it's a tech card with bad stats, so you probably want to be using some of those other cards anyway, which are already played in most of those decks, or can be put in with easy adjustments, things like Polymorph. So, moving on, people have said that you can use this to kill your own Sylvanas and steal a minion, which is true, but that would require, since that has a total cost of 13 mana, that would require your Sylvanas to stay on board without being silenced or otherwise removed for a turn, and then you would have to have a dragon, then you'd have to kill it, and then you'd have to steal the perfect minion. And if they only have one minion, and you have a Sylvanas on board, you can likely pull off some shenanigans anyway. So for a card to be good in conjunction with Sylvanas, although I suppose Sylvanas is good on its own already, it has to cost under 10 mana along with Sylvanas, so you can just immediately kill it and then steal something for a pseudo mind control-like effect. And I also want to remind you guys that this card is really bad at killing an opposing Sylvanas because it'll steal this or something else. So Rend Blackhand is still bad, and I will stand by that. So let's talk about some of the new cards. We have Axe Flinger. I just want to remind you guys that Warsong Commander is still bugged, so things that start with 2 power but enter with more because of effects like Stormwind Champion or Battle Cries will sometimes not get charge. In addition, minions that have death rattles and make things with less than 2 or less attack will sometimes also not get charge. So the combo warrior deck with charge is still not at its best because Warsong Commander has still not been fixed. So let's talk about this deck in context of some other applications. Talk about this card. So a 2/5 for 4 is pretty bad solely stat wise. The ability can potentially deal 10 just off of this card without healing. If Warrior somehow gets healing, whether through playing Earthen Ring Farseer or getting Lightwell from Piloted Shredder, this can potentially do a lot more. But the problem is that the Warrior hero power is not useful in an aggressive deck. It's Armor Up just doesn't really do what you want when you're on the aggro plan, and since most hero powers are pretty core to the strategy, or even in things like Druid, where at least it helps you pick off and sort of stay in the early game while you ramp up and can deal a few more damage on combo, Warrior hero power is really awful in an aggro deck because it's just going to sort of gain you life. At least priests can heal up their minions to get more utility out of them. But warrior aggro is kind of hard to do because the hero power is inconsistent with the deck. So we don't necessarily want to play this in an aggressive style deck, especially since Warsong Commander is still broken. Control Warrior probably has better win conditions than this card, and this card is pretty easy to remove as well. So the only deck I could see this card going in right now is a combo style deck. You could like play this, play another one, or play this faceless it, and then do some sort of bouncing blades thing, and try to kill your opponent in one turn. It does take up a lot of setup, so I don't think it could be great right now with existing cards. But if Warrior gets a few more support cards for that type of combo, maybe some more Whirlwind effects, or other cards that trigger on taking damage, I think this card could potentially be playable. In Arena, it's not super exciting because Arena is all about board control, and this is a has bad stats for a 4-mana minion, and life doesn't matter in Arena as much as board control does, and it's a lot harder to combo in Arena. So I think this card could have a little bit of constructed potential, but it does get hurt by the stats. So if some future cards get released or someone breaks it, it could be cool, but generally I don't think it'll be great in constructed or Arena right now. So let's talk about our last spoiler, Lava Shock. So the maximum net gain of mana this can give you is 6. If you went crazy last turn, or some other combinations, and you've overloaded for 8, either on all last turn or some this turn and some the next turn. So you pay the 2 mana, you get back 8 mana crystals, or unlock 8 either this turn or split among 2 turns. And then you've paid 2 mana to get 8 back, so you're getting a 6 mana net gain. You're also getting the 2 damage. However, that's a really unlikely scenario. Most of the time, this will take off 2 overload, so it'll basically be a free 2 damage that requires an initial investment of 2 mana. So basically, a slightly upgraded Moonfire. I just don't think that's worth the card, worth the loss of a card, because you're sort of you're paying a card and no mana for 2 damage. I don't think a lot of decks are going to want to do that. 2 damage doesn't deal with a lot of stuff, particularly in a Mech Warper meta. And so this card is going to lose you card advantage most of the time. It's a really bad top deck late in the game because it won't even clear stuff most of the time, so it's going to be 2 damage for 2 mana, which isn't really good, and as we discussed, doesn't kill anything. Building a deck with a bunch of cards with overload around this card is, I think, a pretty bad idea. You can only run 2 copies of this card at most, so sometimes you're not going to draw them, and you're going to have serious mana issues. Additionally, there's not that many great cards with overload, with significant overload, other than those already played in Shaman decks. You could play Earth Elemental type things, but building a deck around overload is sort of asking for trouble and a problematic mana base. So, in general, I think this card isn't super constructed playable. It's not terrible in Arena just because it serves the same effect sort of as Demon Fire does as a removal spell, and it can sometimes remove overload cards, or overload crystals, but overall I'd say this card has pretty low constructed potential, and isn't fantastic in Arena. Alright guys, that's all I have to say for today, so thank you for watching, and come back next week and I'll talk about some more of the cards that have been spoiled. Thank you.